If John 20 is one of the most self-authenticating narratives in all of Scripture, because nobody would make up the idea of women being the first witnesses to the risen Jesus, since the testimony of women was often not considered valid in the ancient Near East, then John 21 is even more a self-authenticating narrative. For here we have the restoration of Peter, the commission of Peter, and the final story of the beloved disciple. The chapter focuses on just two figures: Peter, the leader of the Galilean disciples, and the beloved disciple, the leader of the Judean disciples. But where are they? They are back in Galilee, gone fishing. That's where they are. Now, in John 20, there was the story of Jesus' appearance to the disciples twice in the upper room. Once to the disciples minus Thomas, and of course minus Judas, who had hanged himself, and once to the disciples with Thomas present. So those encounters were with the inner circle of the 12, the male disciples. And just as a footnote, Thomas is not doubting Thomas. The Greek is very clear. He's unbelieving Thomas. That's what the Greek says. That is, until he encounters Jesus in the flesh and proclaims, "My Lord and my God." Those were the first two appearances of Jesus to the inner circle of male disciples. This is the third one, according to John 21, and it's unexpected. They've gone fishing. They've gone back to their original practice, and the beloved disciple as a guest has come with them. They fish all night. They catch nothing. Now, this story should be familiar to those who know the gospel well, because we've heard a story exactly like this in Luke 5. Fished all night, caught nothing. Standing on the shore is a man robed, and he cries out, "Lads, have you any fish?" Peter speaks back, "No, try the next landing. Maybe they have some." And then the voice says, "Cast your net on the other side and you'll find." Now they had heard this ridiculous proposition before, and when it was given to them before, they caught a huge catch of fish. And so it is again in this story. 153 fish are suddenly in their nets. And the perceptive one, the beloved disciple, says, "It's the Lord." And when Peter hears that, he comically, because all he had was his loincloth on, thinks, "Oh, I don't want to go see the Lord with no clothes on." So he wraps his robe around him, dives into the water, and swims to shore, leaving the rest of the disciples struggling to pull in this catch of fish to shore. So there's a humor in the story. And when Peter gets there, look at what happens. Now, as I've said before, nothing happens in this gospel by accident. There are only two stories that mention a charcoal fire in the Gospel of John. The first is where Peter warmed his hands outside of the house of Caiaphas and denied Jesus 3 times. The second is here as part of breakfast by the sea, when in fact Jesus has prepared bread and fish for them to eat, and Peter is restored 3 times. And here's how the poignant story goes. When they had gathered and had begun to eat, Jesus begins over with our friend Peter. He calls him by his proper birth name, Simon, son of John. "Do you love me more than these?" asks Jesus. Now you need to know a little Greek here, because Jesus asks about agape. Peter responds, "Lord, you know I phileo you." That is, you know I love you like a brother. Not clear whether Jesus is asking, do you love me more than you love these people? Do you love me more than they love me? Or do you love me more than you love these things, i.e. fishing? In any case, he's asking Peter about what is his chief love. "Lord, you know I love you like a brother." He gets a recommission. Jesus says, feed my lambs. Jesus asks a second time, Simon, son of John, not Peter, not Rocky, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Again, agape. And again, Peter responds with a very different Greek word, phileo. Lord, you know I love you like a brother. Well, then, tend my sheep. First lambs, then sheep. And Jesus asks a third time, because there were 3 denials, Simon, do you at least love me like a brother? Now Jesus uses the word phileo. And Simon loses it. He breaks down. He says, Lord, you know everything. You know I love you. And Jesus says to him, then feed my sheep. A threefold commission reverses the threefold denial. And we're off and running with Peter again being the leader of the Galilean disciples. But then Jesus says, the day is coming when you will be bound and taken to an end, as I was, that you would not intend or desire. For now, you're free to come and go to share the good news, but a day is coming when your end will be not unlike my own. Then Peter, very typical of Peter, it does one of these, here I am, Lord, take my brother things. He says, but Lord, what about him? If this is my end, what about him? And Jesus responds, if it is my will for the beloved disciple to live until I return again, what's that to you? You must follow me. That's what you must do. And then we have this funny parenthesis where it said, now Jesus didn't say that the beloved disciple would live until the second coming. He simply said, if it is my will for him to live until I come again, what is that to you? You must follow me. Why do we need this disclaimer? Because by the time the fourth gospel had been put together by John of Patmos, the beloved disciple had died. And it is a surprise, because if indeed the beloved disciple is Lazarus, they must have assumed if Jesus raised him from the dead once, surely he's not going to die again. Now, I'm not an archaeologist, but if I was, the one thing I'd like to find is the tombstone of Lazarus, which would say, died 29 AD, and below that, died 43 AD. That would confuse a few people. It seems that the community of the beloved disciple assumed that Lazarus, the beloved disciple, would not die again until Jesus came, but that's not what happened. So the very end of the gospel says this to us. This is the testimony of the beloved disciple who wrote these things down, and we know his testimony is true. Who's the we? That's the community of Christian faith, later reflecting on the legacy of the beloved disciple. For the Gospel of John is the story of a Judean disciple whom Jesus raised from the dead and left us this marvelous fourth gospel.